is, until I looked it up and saw he wasn't in there, I just assumed he was in there.
I did too. I was shocked to find out that he wasn't in there.
I actually was shocked when I found that he wasn't in as well. I thought he was, because I mean there's a lot of great guys defensively on that team, but I assumed he was in there years ago, and then when I found out he wasn't, I was shocked.
All right, now we let you talk about L.C. Greenwood. Now you got to defend Lynn Swann.
Well, okay, I'm going to defend Lynn Swann. I'm going to ask you a question to defend him. You and I have had this conversation before, and you've told me that anybody that was on the All-Decade team deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Lynn Swann was on the All-Decade team.
Yeah, but he didn't deserve that either.
Okay, well, now let's look at this. I feel its criteria for Hall of Fame is not only what you did in your career, but also with that, what you did in the big stage. Now, the difference between how I feel and how it's voted on is I believe that there are people that vote based on the iconic view that they may have of, again, Joe Namath being an example. He gets an iconic view for the Super Bowl when, really honestly, when you look at it, he really didn't do anything. I think you have to have those things together.
He was 17 for 28, 206 yards. He did convert some big third downs. He did some stuff there. It wasn't like he was, Peyton Manning in the rain in Super Bowl 41 or Big Ben in Super Bowl 40.
No, absolutely. But, Lynn Swann, he went to 3 Pro Bowls. He was obviously Super Bowl champion. He was an MVP of the Super Bowl. When you look at his career, I mean, again, different era, but, I know he had over 5,000 yards, receiving yards, 51 touchdowns. But when you look at what he did in the playoffs and the Super Bowl, the big catches, those are things I think when you put those together, I feel that makes him a Hall of Fame wide receiver.
All right,
you're taking his career and what he did in the playoffs and Super Bowl.
All right, but your 5,462 yards is not even in the top 250 all-time for receivers.
Right.
Or it's top 50. Let me change that. It's barely in the top 250. His total receptions at 51, you want to compare him, Drew Pearson. And Drew Pearson was huge in big games, and a lot of big games. You look at the 75 Hail Mary game against the Vikings. He had 489 receptions, which is 150 more.
Swann had 336 for his career.
Yeah, and you're looking at Drew Pearson had 8,000 yards, and he's rarely even mentioned as a candidate for induction. And, I mean,
Cliff Branch.
Yeah, Cliff Branch. You look at Cliff Branch's numbers. I mean, there's a ton of guys with better numbers that did play great in big games. I mean, Drew Pearson was one of the best big game receivers in NFL history. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. But, I believe almost lost you there. I believe Drew Pearson, is also one of those receivers that, definitely you talk about, as being one of the best. But my thing with Lynn Swann is, you look at his career stats, but going with that, look at what he did in the big stage. Again, it's not only what you did for your career, but also, I call it the iconic view of what people see, what he did in the big stage. And, in the Super Bowl, it was MVP in the Super Bowl. The numbers that he put up in the Super Bowl and playoff, I believe when you put everything together, he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame.
All right, Matt.
I don't have a problem with Lynn Swann being in the Hall of Fame because, he was one of the best big game receivers, especially in that decade. There's no question. But what I have a problem with is a guy like Cliff Branch not being in the Hall of Fame. Lynn Swann never posted a 1,000-yard season. Cliff Branch, I think he's got like 2 or 3 of them in an era where that didn't happen very often. I think Stallworth was the better receiver on the Steelers. As good as Swann was, he played 8 seasons. I think it's a travesty that Drew Pearson and Cliff Branch are not in the Hall of Fame, and then you got to go with guys like Isaac Bruce and Terrell Owens. Those guys are all much more deserving than Lynn Swann. That isn't to say that I don't think Swann belongs, but there are guys that should have been put in before him, and it's a travesty that they are not in.
And I'll give you this. Lynn Swann's playoff statistics, just looked it up. 16 games, he averaged 3 catches a game. He had 9 touchdowns in 16 games. I mean, basically, he won the MVP of 2 big catches in Super Bowl 10. But if you look at him, 77 playoff game against Denver, 1 catch, 6 yards. 3 playoff games in 78, he caught 13 balls. 79, he caught 12. 82, 1 catch for 14. 74, the Super Bowl 9 year. 3 games, 5 receptions, 70 yards. So, I mean, it's not that he was huge in big games. He was huge in Super Bowl 10.
Yes, and that's what it's like Joe. It's precisely like it's the Joe Namath factor. You know, that's what he's remembered for those 2 incredible catches in Super Bowl 10, and they were awesome, especially the one where he kept both feet in. Amazing. But that's what he's remembered for. And that's what the image that is in everyone's mind, and that's why he's in. I think people assume that that's how he played every game, and it just isn't the case. I like Lynn Swann, but he does not belong in over a guy like Drew Pearson or Cliff Branch. There's just no way.
All right, so we're going to attack Matt now, okay, Brian, because we both agree on this one. He does not believe Terry Bradshaw is one of the greatest quarterbacks that ever lived.
Oh, my goodness.
Matt,
I don't believe he's in the top 10. That doesn't mean he's not in the top 15.
Oh, you were ripping him earlier when we were talking. No, don't be changing
top
your
10. I don't think he's top 10. That's all.
How is he not top 10? He won 4 Super Bowls.
Yeah. I just don't think he had the real body of work in the regular season, and I don't think he was fantastic in all those Super Bowls. I think he was really good in 78 and 79, and that's kind of what his career has lived off of.
All right.
He's got 2 more touchdowns and interceptions, and that's because of his last game in 1983.
Well, no, because the interceptions to touchdown problem came his first 4 or 5 years where he struggled, where a lot of guys did back then in their first 4 or 5 years.
Right.
But, Brian, you want to attack this?
Well, I mean, first of all, you know, he won 4 Super Bowls. When you look at the body of work, when you look at the stats, I mean, we can sit here and talk about stats, but again, it was the Steeler offense back then was a run-based offense, and they threw deep a lot. Again, kind of when you look at that era. So, to me, completion percentage, interceptions, touchdowns is always going to be a little skewed back then as opposed to what we see now. But the bottom line is, I mean, the guy was a winner. I mean, look at what they did, and obviously in that time period, with the Super Bowls and the seasons they have, look at what they did. Again, one of those things where you can look at the stats and you can look at what he did as far as stats and things like that, but then you've got to look at, the bottom line is this: 4 Super Bowls. 1 football game.
I'm not saying he's no good. I'm just saying I don't think he's not in my top 10.
He's, to me, he is, and I do agree that I think, a lot of people think as you do, and I mean, I think he's very underrated, but I think when you go back and you watch him play in the body of work and what he was asked to do, I mean, the bottom line is this: did you win? And he won. He always put them in a position to win because they had the great defense. There are a lot of quarterbacks out there that have had great defense and still don't win and lose a lot of games, 17-7. But he put them in a position to win. And, I mean, to me, he definitely is a top 10 quarterback. There's not a doubt in my mind.
All right, so we'll just agree that me and Brian are right and Matt is wrong. All right,
wait, so we're 1-1 on this.
I'm 2-0. But the other guy that blows my mind is not in the Hall of Fame. I don't know what you feel about this one, Brian, but Robert Brazil.
Oh, my goodness. How he's not in the Hall of Fame is a travesty. And I know you and I have had that conversation before, but how that guy with what he did is not the Hall of Fame. I think the one list I think you did, I think you had him as your number one guy that should be in there, and I told you, I said I agreed with that because, he was an unbelievable player and a guy that, I still don't understand why he is, why he's not there and should have been there, first ballot guy.
And the thing about him is he was Lawrence Taylor before Lawrence Taylor was. And I know me and Matt had him on the show, and I found some YouTube highlights of him. You watch the YouTube highlights of him, like the Tums Neutralizer or something. You watch that, and if you don't know any better, it looks exactly like Lawrence Taylor. But you know what?
It looks like Lawrence Taylor is playing on the Oilers.
Yeah, well, it's not even that. It's that Robert Brazil is a quiet guy, still is. Doesn't go around thumping his chest saying, look at me, where Lawrence Taylor did. And Lawrence Taylor played in New York, which was a lot bigger city to play in. And, but to me, Robert Brazil was Lawrence Taylor before Lawrence Taylor was. He was the prototype of a pass-rushing outside linebacker in the NFL. And, the things that Bum Phillips did with him, kind of revolutionized and set the pace for what Lawrence Taylor would later do. His first 7 years, he was a Pro Bowl selection. But on top of that, 5 of those times was a first-team All-Pro selection, which is more important than a Pro Bowl selection, on the All-Decade team in the 70s. But the 1975 NFL Defensive Rookie of the Year. And the thing that was amazing about that is when he went to college, he was on the same team with, Ricky Young, Walter Payton. Him and Peyton were 2 of the first 6 picks in the draft from a small college, Jackson State.
Well, the one stat that comes out to me. Go ahead.
When you go back and watch him, he's exactly the kind of dominant outside linebacker that reminds you of Lawrence Taylor, and that Oiler defense is just so underrated. I think what all that happened is just, he played in Houston. Houston didn't win Super Bowls, and unfortunately, this is the problem with the whole selection process. Guys like that just get forgotten, and it's wrong.
Yeah, it took Curly Culp a while to get in, too, and he should have been a guy that got in right away. But another one that I think should be in, or Matt, you want to bring one up?
Oh, I would go a guy like Chuck Foreman. Chuck Foreman, if you're going to go into running backs, probably one of the first. He kind of revolutionized the complete running back position when you expected to block, run, and catch the ball out of the backfield. And, Roger Craig is another one. They're very similar. I think both of them have the numbers that could make it. And, I just don't think that I'm not sure if they're ever really going to over time. But I would argue for both of them.
All right, Brian.
Well, I was going to bring up Roger Craig. And when you said his name, to me, I don't know how Roger Craig is not. It's not the Hall of Fame. And again, I'm nowhere near a 49ers fan, and I'm saying it because to me, he was a guy that, from a running back standpoint, I think where, when you talk about Chuck Foreman revolutionizing, the running back position, I think Roger Craig was the guy that, well, maybe not from a revolutionizing standpoint, but from a standpoint of here was a guy that you, as a defense in the NFL, you not only was he going to run the football, but you knew he was going to catch the ball out of the backfield. He definitely is a true definition of a running back that did everything. And also, again, this is not something that is going to get anybody in the Hall of Fame, but when you look at somebody's body of work, he was also, not bad when it came to pass protection. So here's a guy that could run the football, catch the football out of the backfield, and also, when called upon, protect the quarterback. So there's, to me, again, when we talk about the whole body of work, that's a guy that deserves to be there.
Yeah,
and he
you're
was
looking
great
at
in
over
3 Super Bowls.